welcome to this video lecture. And in this video lecture, I will be solving previous year's questions and discussing the answers. And as you know, you can see on your screen, we will be discussing questions from excretory products and their elimination. And we are in part 2 of this series. Okay, so let's not waste more time and let's begin. Alright, as you know the drill, please keep a paper and pen with you so that you can write down your answers and the discussions if you need to. Okay. Alright, so question number 1. Which one of the 4 parts mentioned below does not constitute a part of single uriniferous tubule? Okay. So this appeared, okay, before I begin with the question, this appeared in 1994. So which one of the 4 parts, okay, so you have your ABCD, does not constitute, please read the question carefully, okay, does not constitute a part of single uriniferous tubule. Okay, so let's understand what uriniferous tubule is, okay, and please don't assume that uriniferous tubule is equal to nephron. Uriniferous tubule is not synonym with nephron, okay? It is equal to nephron plus collecting tubule. Okay? It is nephron plus collecting tubule. I know you've seen in some places uriniferous tubule is equal to nephron. No, it is not equal to nephron. Okay, you can write, please note this down. This is a very important piece of information. Okay, so let's look at our answer options. So you have A, distal convoluted tubule. Yes, it is a part of nephron, so it is not the right answer. It does not constitute, it doesn't fit into the answer. B, collecting duct. Yes, collecting duct is not a part of uriniferous tubule. Okay, so the uriniferous tubule stops at collecting tubule. Okay. C, Bowman's capsule. Yes. D, loop of Henle. Yes, that is all part of single uriniferous tubule. So collecting duct is the right answer. It does not constitute a part of a single uriniferous tubule. So your answer should be B. Okay, let's look at the discussion. Okay, so here you have diagram of nephron, and that includes the collecting tubule as well as the collecting duct. I'm sure if you watched part 1 of my series, you would be familiar with this diagram. It's taken from Guyton's book. It's a textbook of medical physiology. Okay. Okay, so uriniferous tubule consists of nephrons and collecting tubule. So this part is a nephron, and this is the cortical and the medullary collecting tubule. So as you move down further, it then forms into larger collecting ducts. Okay, so collecting tubules then join to form larger tubules called collecting ducts, or they are called papillary ducts or ducts of Bellini. Okay. And this definition of uriniferous tubule is there in a textbook of human histology by Inderbir Singh. It's a common textbook that is studied by students, MBBS students. Okay, so it's a good textbook if you want to study human histology, but don't worry about this in need, just follow this. Okay, by Inderbir Singh. Okay, so the definition of uriniferous tubule consists of nephrons and collecting tubule. Clear? Okay, so don't get confused. Okay, uriniferous tubule is not equivalent to nephron. You have to get that concept clear. According to the options, it was easy for you to assume that if a uriniferous tubule is equal to nephron, then clearly collecting duct is not part of the answer. But what if they had given you something else? Okay, so just be careful when you're answering this question. Okay. Alright, I hope this was clear. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 2. Proximal and distal convoluted tubules are parts of, okay, you have your options, and this appeared in 1990. So you have your options A, B, C, and D. A. Seminiferous tubules, B. nephron, C. oviduct, D. vas deferens. So clearly we are studying excretory system, so we clearly know PCT and DCT are part of nephron. Okay, D is the right answer. Okay, no need to explain, it's very simple. So proximal and distal convoluted tubules are part of nephrons. Okay, so I'll not waste more time discussing this. We'll move on to the next question. Okay, question number 3. The net pressure gradient that causes the fluid to filter out of the glomeruli into the capsule is, and you have your options A, B, C, and D, and this appeared in 2005. Okay, so you have A, B, C, and D. So what will be the right answer? You have to find the net pressure gradient. So let's understand how this net pressure gradient is calculated. Okay, so you have your glomeruli, you have your afferent arteriole and efferent arteriole, and below that you have your Bowman's capsule. Okay, this is Bowman's capsule. This is glomerulus. Okay, so blood is flowing in over here. Okay, let me choose blood as a, I don't know if it's visible to you. I guess this will be visible. Blood is flowing in. Okay, it's getting filtered here. Okay, and then the rest is moving out. Okay, now how is this net pressure gradient calculated? That causes the fluid to filter out of the glomeruli into the capsule. That's the question. Now we need to understand that there are 4 forces involved. Okay, there are 4 forces involved which help us to determine the net pressure gradient. Now, which are those 4 forces? Okay, there are over here 4 forces. The first force is the hydrostatic pressure of this glomerulus. Okay, hydrostatic pressure of the glomerulus of G. Okay, I'm just writing it as G. Okay, now if there's a hydrostatic pressure of glomerulus, there is an oncotic pressure also. Okay, there is a blood colloidal pressure, osmotic pressure. Okay, there is a colloidal osmotic pressure, that's called oncotic pressure also. Okay, so there is an oncotic pressure of G, glomeruli. Similarly, there's a hydrostatic pressure for Bowman's capsule. Okay, there is a little bit of force coming out from the Bowman's capsule back into the glomeruli. Okay, there's a little bit of force coming out from the capsule into the glomeruli. So hydrostatic pressure of capsule. I'll just write it as C. Okay, so that means I'm talking about Bowman's capsule. And similarly, there is colloid or osmotic pressure or oncotic pressure of the capsule. Of C. I'm talking about Bowman's capsule here. Okay, C. Now, if you watched my lectures on body fluids and circulation, I have clearly explained how hydrostatic pressure pushes the fluid out. Okay, and there is albumin present in the blood which pulls the fluid back in, because you don't want to lose that fluid, right? So arteries are pushing blood, or moving at a very high pressure. Okay, so the fluid tends to move out of those capillaries, but you need to bring back that fluid, that lost fluid, back into the capillaries. Okay, so there are albumin present inside our blood which pull that fluid back in. Okay, that pull that fluid back in, that's called blood colloid osmotic pressure. Okay, it is a type of osmotic movement, of osmotic pressure rather. Okay, so over here, clear that concept is clear, right? So over here we have a hydrostatic pressure of glomerulus. Okay, so blood is moving in at very high pressure, so there is some hydrostatic pressure over there, but there will similarly be an oncotic pressure of the glomeruli that is opposing that. Okay, it is opposing that hydrostatic pressure. Okay, so it is in a way opposing filtration. Okay, it is opposing filtration. Similarly, there is hydrostatic pressure of the capsule. Okay, and similarly then there is an oncotic pressure of capsule. So hydrostatic pressure of capsule is again opposing filtration, it is going back up. Our job is to filter the blood, that is the plasma that is flowing in. Our job is what? To filter the plasma that is flowing in. Our job is that, but we don't want an opposing force, but there is an opposing force. Okay, so there is some hydrostatic pressure that is there in the capsule also, that is opposing that filtration. Okay, that is opposing the filtration. All right, but on the same time, on the same hand, there's oncotic pressure of capsule also, that's pulling back in, right? There is some oncotic pressure also that is pulling back in, but this oncotic pressure of capsule is negligible, so we usually use it as 0. Okay, is this 0 mm pressure here? Why? Because there is no protein present over here. Okay, once everything is filtered out, okay, the plasma is filtered out, protein does not enter that filtrate. Okay, so there is not much oncotic pressure of capsule, very negligible, so we usually write it down as 0 mm mercury. Okay, but sorry. So but there will be some pressure, hydrostatic pressure of glomeruli, yes, that is a favoring pressure, so that favors filtration. Sorry, right? But oncotic pressure of glomeruli is opposing filtration. So similarly, hydrostatic pressure of capsule is also opposing filtration. You got the point, right? Oncotic pressure of capsule, it is favoring filtration, but it is negligible because there are no proteins present there. So there is not much pressure there. So it is usually marked as 0 mm mercury. Alright, so this is how net pressure gradient is calculated. Now, how do you calculate? We've given you the pressures, but the final result would be favoring filtration minus the opposing filtration pressures. That will give you the net pressure gradient. Okay, ideally it is 20 mm mercury. I don't know if you can see this. It is 20 mm mercury. It is, I'm sorry, 10 mm mercury, but our option, we will the closest is 20 mm mercury. So ideally the net pressure gradient is 10 mm mercury. As per medical textbooks, the values that are given, they come down to 10 mm mercury. Okay, the pressures that are given for all, when you calculate that, comes down to 10 mm mercury. So, but our options don't have that 10 mm mercury, so we will select 20 mm mercury. So your answer should be C. Okay, we will come to the discussion. I have explained most of it, so the discussion should be easy to understand. It has nice diagrams, so you will enjoy. You can visualize what I'm talking about. So there are 4 forces involved in determining the net filtration rate. So hydrostatic pressure inside the glomerular capillaries, that's 60 mm mercury, that's the value. Okay, this hydrostatic pressure in Bowman's capsule, that's 18 mm mercury. Okay, so this is opposing filtration, this is favoring filtration. oncotic pressure of the glomerular capillaries is 32 mm mercury. Okay, and then oncotic pressure of the proteins in Bowman's capsule 0 mm mercury, like I already explained to you. So clearly it is net pressure is 60 minus, then it would be opposing, all you combine all the opposing forces. So that's 18 plus 32. Okay, so this is the good diagram explaining that. Okay, here in this diagram they have not he has not shown, this is taken from Guyton. Okay, he has not shown the oncotic pressure of protein was at 0, so we'll just ignore that. But just to inform you that yes, it is marked, there is a pressure that exists, but it is 0. So net pressure gradient is, it's negligible, I mean to say, so we take it as 0. So the net pressure gradient will be 10 mm mercury. Okay, but since our option did not have 10 mm mercury, so we have taken it as 20 mm mercury. Okay, so I hope this was clear to you. Yeah, so it's a good question. So this deserves a smiley face. You need to understand what are the forces involved. Okay, so without understanding the forces involved, you will not be able to answer this question. Okay, all right, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 4. Which of the following statements is correct? So we have to find the correct statement here. A. The descending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. No, that's incorrect. Descending limb is permeable to water. The ascending limb of loop of Henle is permeable to water. No, it's also again incorrect. The descending limb of loop of Henle is permeable to electrolytes. No, like I said, it's permeable to water. D. The ascending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. Yes, that is the correct answer. It is permeable to electrolytes and it is impermeable to water. Okay, so D is the correct answer. This appeared in 2017, NEET 2017. So the correct answer should be answer D. Okay. To understand loop of Henle, I will briefly explain how this works. Okay. So there are two ways by which the ascending limb of loop of Henle reabsorbs electrolytes. Okay, there are two methods. So there are two types of ports that are present. Okay, there is a port called the sodium chloride potassium port. I believe it is sodium 2 chloride, 1 potassium, 1 sodium, 2 chloride port. Okay, there is another one that is sodium hydrogen co-transport mechanism. Okay, so there are two ways by which electrolytes are reabsorbed back into the blood in the ascending limb of loop of Henle. It's important to understand this because when you are studying countercurrent mechanism, this plays a very important role. Okay, this plays a very important role in creating a hyperosmotic environment in the renal medulla. Okay, so now let's assume that this is your cell. Okay, you have the interstitial fluid here. I'll take another pen for this. Okay, this is your tubule. Okay, interstitial fluid here. Now the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle does the main part of reabsorbing electrolytes. The thin ascending loop also actively participates, but it is less compared to the thick ascending limb. Okay, so the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle plays a very important role in reabsorbing electrolytes. Okay, so over here we have a sodium potassium ATPase pump. I hope you know and you understand how this works. Okay, so sodium is released, potassium enters, okay, with the help of ATPase. Okay, this is how the sodium potassium ATPase pump works. On the other hand, you have another co-transport. I'm sorry, this is called the counter transport. I'm very sorry. This is not counter transport mechanism. Okay. Which one was I using? I was using the green one. On the other hand, you have this co-transport mechanism where one sodium, two chloride and one potassium are entering the cell. Correct? So sodium leaves, potassium enters, but along with that, this sodium, chloride, potassium enter this intracellular space. Okay, so it creates a concentration gradient. Okay, so this enters, 3 sodiums are pulled out. Along with that, chloride and potassium also leave. Okay, along with sodium, chloride and potassium also leave back into the interstitial fluid space. Okay, so 3 sodium move out, 2 potassium move in. We know that. Along with that, sodium, chloride and potassium enter this space and they also leave. Okay, they also leave. So basically the sodium is handled by this 3 sodium pump. Chloride, there are leak channels. Potassium also leaks out. Okay, but we need to also remember that when potassium leaks out, some potassium also back leaks into the tubule. Okay, so what happens with potassium is chloride leaves along with sodium. Okay, chloride leaves along with sodium. In the case of potassium, potassium also leaves, some potassium leave back into the interstitial fluid, but there is some backflow. Okay, there is some backflow of potassium back into the tubule. Okay, so this creates a positive voltage. Okay, positive voltage, don't worry about that. This creates a positive voltage. Now what happens along with that is, between the cells there is space. Between the cells there is space. So that potassium pulls calcium and magnesium also along with it. Okay, potassium, there is some back leak, okay, of potassium. There is some potassium leaving over here. There is some back leak of potassium in this tubule area. Okay, now this potassium along pulls the calcium and magnesium ions through this space between the cells. This is called paracellular diffusion. Okay, this process is called paracellular diffusion. Okay, so this is what happens in the ascending limb of loop of Henle. This is one part, okay, where reabsorption takes place. I think about 25% of the electrolytes, where the reabsorption of electrolytes takes place in the ascending limb of loop of Henle, and this plays a very important role. So it's good that if you understand this concept. Okay, so I have explained how this works. Now there is one more. There is sodium hydrogen pump. Okay, this sodium hydrogen pump, it's called a counter transport mechanism. It is important for you to understand how these exchanges are happening. Okay, there's a co-transport, there's a counter transport. Okay, now what happens with sodium hydrogen? I will remove this. I think it's best if I just delete all this, so it's easier for me to. Okay, I will redraw it for you guys. So, oh shit, what did I do? To draw the cells, I just draw a tubule. Okay, so you have a cell here. Okay, and you have your interstitial fluid space here. On the other hand, what do you have? You have your tubule here. Okay. So, what happens in the case of sodium hydrogen counter transport mechanism? Okay, so there is a sodium hydrogen pump where hydrogen is secreted. Okay, H plus ions are secreted into the tubule, and in the opposite direction sodium is moving out of this tubule. So this is the interstitial fluid space. Interstitial fluid space. This is the tubule. Okay, it's important to understand this again. Hydrogen ions are secreted into the tubule. Sodium ion is moved out. Okay, again there is an ATPase pump over here. We know that sodium is kicked out. That's how I remember it. Sodium kicked out. So 3 sodium kicked out, 2 potassium entered. Okay, so hydrogen ions are secreted into this tubule. Sodium is moving out. Okay, now we need to understand how this hydrogen ion is coming. Okay, now that it's not that hydrogen ion is just present there, okay, for the job. No, hydrogen ion is being produced. Now, how is hydrogen ion being produced? I hope you are familiar with this equation. CO2 plus water forms H2CO3 and then breaks to H plus and HCO3 minus ions. That is how H plus ion is being produced. Okay, so H plus ion is produced with the combination of carbon dioxide and water, then forms bicarbonate, carbonic acid, and then which breaks down into dissociates into H plus and HCO3 minus ions. So now H plus ion is forming, but HCO3 minus ions are also being formed, right? So what happens to this HCO3 minus ions? HCO3, the bicarbonate ions, are then reabsorbed into the interstitial space. Okay, so as the concentration increases, they tend to move out. So the interesting part is, every time an H plus ion is being formed, a bicarbonate ion, that means secreted into the tubule, bicarbonate ion is being reabsorbed back into the interstitial space to maintain the acid-base balance. So this is a very important concept. Okay, and it's a very important thing to understand how this ascending limb of loop of Henle, that is why I explained this to you, how this ascending limb of loop of Henle plays a very important role. Okay, so every time when H plus ion is secreted in, sodium is moving out. This is the counter transport. Okay, sodium is moving out because the sodium potassium ATPase pump is creating a concentration gradient. It is able to move in, and hydrogen ion is being secreted back into the tubule. Now every time a hydrogen ion is not just present there, it is being formed. Okay, so every time a hydrogen ion is being formed, and bicarbonate ion is also being formed. Okay, so the bicarbonate ions moves into the interstitial space over here. Okay, so yes, this is it. We'll go to the discussion. I hope this was not too heavy for you and you've understood. To answer your question, yes, let's go back before I move to the discussion. The ascending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. It is impermeable to water, but it is permeable to electrolytes. And how? Yes, I have explained these two transport mechanisms, okay, by which this whole process takes place. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. This descending limb of loop of Henle is highly permeable to water. Yes, and moderately permeable to most solutes, including urea and sodium. Okay, about 20% of the water in the filtrate is reabsorbed in the loop of Henle. So This loop of Henle plays a very important role in concentrating urine. Okay, it plays a very important role in concentrating the filtrate which finally forms the urine. Okay, so about 20% of the water is being reabsorbed in the loop of Henle. So the ascending limb is impermeable to water and perform reabsorption of sodium, chloride and potassium. Okay, other ions such as calcium, bicarbonate and magnesium are also reabsorbed. I've already explained that to you. Okay, so the thin ascending limb has a lower capacity to reabsorb as compared to the thick segment. So I've already explained that to you. So about 25%, okay, 25% of the electrolytes, including sodium, chloride, potassium, are reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb. Okay, 25% of the electrolytes are being reabsorbed back into the blood through the thick ascending limb. So sodium potassium pump is placed in the basolateral side. I've already explained that to you. So that pulls the sodium into the intracellular region via the 1 sodium, 2 chloride, 1 potassium co-transporter mechanism. Okay. So slight back leak of potassium into the tubular lumen allows the passage of sodium, magnesium, calcium and potassium via the paracellular diffusion. Okay, so there is some amount of potassium that is going back in the lumen, the tubule. Okay, and that allows the transport, or that rather the diffusion, the paracellular diffusion, that is between those two cells. Okay, where calcium, magnesium also get reabsorbed via that method. Also, there are sodium hydrogen counter transport mechanism that mediates reabsorption of sodium and secretion of H plus ions. Okay, that also I have explained to you. So there are basically two methods. Okay, sodium potassium ATPase pump plays a very important role in creating that concentration gradient. Okay, and that is pushing out the sodium, so sodium is being pulled into that intracellular region. Okay, so similarly with sodium and hydrogen counter transport mechanism, there also again hydrogen ion is being created and that is like being used, okay, over there. And with every hydrogen ion that is being secreted into the tubule, bicarbonate ion moves out, that is, it is reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so this was loop of Henle for you, and this is a very important concept, okay, to be able to understand the countercurrent mechanism. Okay, let's move on to the next question. Okay, yes, sorry, I forgot about this diagram. So this is again taken from Guyton. Guyton's textbook of medical physiology is a very good book to study human physiology. So most of my references are from there. There is another reference which I usually read is Ganong. So that's another textbook on human physiology. So these diagrams are taken from Guyton. So yes, so he has shown here the thin descending loop of Henle. So it is permeable to water. And over here, you see the thick ascending limb over here. So it reabsorbs these electrolytes and secretes H plus ions. Okay, so over here now you can clearly see, right? Because you've also seen a diagram over here. So you have the sodium 2 chloride potassium pump, right? And this potassium is moving out as well as it is leaking back. Okay, it is leaking back in. So this creates an environment for sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium to diffuse out. Okay, this is called paracellular diffusion, and this is the sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, this is present on the basolateral side, okay, of the cell. Clearly, I've explained this to you. If you want, you can go back, read the discussion. If you want, listen to my explanation also, and you can note it down in books because this is very important. So this was actually a good question. So this deserves a smiley face. Okay, this was a good question. Okay, and so your concept is very clear. Okay, because now you know how the electrolytes are being reabsorbed, how loop of Henle is working. Now it's stuck in your head. Okay, what happens where in the loop of Henle? Okay, so let's move on to the next question. All right, question number 5. The part of nephron involved in active reabsorption of sodium is, you have A, B, C, and D, and this appeared in NEET 2016. So the part of nephron involved in active reabsorption of sodium is distal convoluted tubule, no. Proximal convoluted tubule, yes. Bowman's capsule, no. Descending limb of loop of Henle's loop, no. So clearly B is the right answer. Okay, it is answer B. Let's look at the discussion. Alright, so 65% of sodium and water are reabsorbed in the PCT. Okay. Now there are two ways by which sodium is reabsorbed. Okay, there are two ways by which sodium is reabsorbed. Now in the Henle's loop wala question, I explained how there's a counter transport mechanism, the co-transport mechanism, right? So similarly over here in the PCT, a similar concept is applied here. Okay, so let's say you have your brush bordered epithelium over here. Okay, so on one side you have your tubule. This is the basolateral side, so the interstitial fluid is here. All right. Now there are two ways. The first way, there is a co-transport mechanism. Now you know what is co-transport mechanism, right? Oh, let me just choose another one that you can see. Yeah. Okay, there's a way by which sodium is reabsorbed. Okay. Now this happens with the help of glucose. This happens with the help of glucose. So glucose helps in the reabsorption of sodium. Not only glucose but also amino acids. So glucose and amino acids help in the reabsorption of sodium. So you have glucose in this tubule, you have amino acids, you have sodium, right? So glucose is moving in along with sodium. Now there is a sodium potassium ATPase pump. Now you clearly know how that works. So sodium kicked out, potassium moves in, glucose moves in along with sodium, and this is a secondary active transport mechanism. Okay, this glucose potassium or this co-transport mechanism, you can note this down if you like, but this is very important also to understand, is a secondary active transport mechanism. Okay, so glucose, amino acids are being pulled in along with sodium. So that is how sodium is being reabsorbed. Okay, that is how sodium is being reabsorbed. Along with that, glucose and amino acids are being not filtered out, but are being reabsorbed back into the blood, because you don't want to lose glucose and amino acids. They are very essential to your body, right? You don't want to lose that glucose and amino acids, because if they are filtered out, then you'll not be left with anything. Glucose and amino acids do get filtered in that glomerulus capsule and the Bowman's capsule. Okay, they are being filtered out, but big proteins are not filtered out, but glucose and amino acids do get filtered out. Okay, but you don't want to lose that. So this PCT is designed in such a way that sodium is also being reabsorbed. Along with that, come on, glucose and amino acids, you also have to come with me. So glucose and amino acids are also being reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so this is a very interesting and a very good mechanism, very active mechanism by which glucose and amino acids along with sodium are being reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, So this is one way. The other way is sodium hydrogen pump. Okay, this is sodium hydrogen pump here. So hydrogen gets secreted, sodium moves out. This is what, again, I've explained to you, the sodium hydrogen pump is the counter transport mechanism. Counter transport because they're moving in opposite directions. Simple. That's how it's named. Co-transport, they're moving together. Counter transport mechanism. Okay, so sodium hydrogen pump is designed in such a way that hydrogen is secreted into the tubule and sodium moves out. Okay, so how is this hydrogen formed? Again, I told you via the method of CO2 plus water, which forms carbonic acid and then breaks down into HCO3 minus. Remember when we studied breathing and exchange of gases, I told you how important, sometimes my pen goes crazy, how important this equation is, okay, this reaction is. Okay, so now you see that here. Okay, so H plus ions are formed and bicarbonate ions are then reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so these are the two ways by which sodium is reabsorbed in the PCT. We will come to the discussion. Please note this down if you like. Okay, this is important to understand how PCT works because it will be very helpful in clearing your concepts. Any question that you get regarding PCT, regarding the loop of Henle that I explained to you, you can easily answer this question now. Okay, that is why it is important to understand these concepts. So, co-transport mechanism with the help of glucose and amino acids. I already explained to you. Counter transport mechanism with the help of hydrogen ions. Okay, so the brush bordered epithelium, you know, the brush bordered cuboidal cells are present in the PCT. Okay, so they have a large number of mitochondria. It's a very active cells. Okay, and the brush border provides an extended surface area. So they're designed like that, so to provide an extended surface area, and they have lots of mitochondria which make them very metabolically active. Okay, it's a very economical way of, you know, just look at it. It's a very interesting way because it's a very economical way of, you know, reabsorbing sodium. Then glucose and amino acids are also going along with it. Okay, it's a very interesting method. So the sodium potassium ATPase pump pulls out sodium from the intracellular space, allowing for sodium ions to move into the tubule cells along with glucose and amino acids. So sodium potassium ATPase pump plays an important role in creating this concentration gradient. Okay, this concentration gradient is formed. So it kicks out sodium. Just remember it. Sodium kicked out, potassium in. Sodium kicked out, potassium in. So it creates a concentration gradient in the cell. So sodium is allowed to move in. Alright. So in the counter transport mechanism, H plus ions are secreted into the lumen and sodium moves out. Okay, these two mechanisms are very important for you to understand. Okay, this concept has to be very clear to you, this counter transport mechanism, the co-transport mechanism. And if you know this, your MBBS is going to be very easy. Okay, because you will come across these same concepts in MBBS when you study physiology. Okay, so that is why I'm telling you, if you like, please note it down in your textbook, in your notebook, sorry, and it is so that you can learn it and your concepts are very clear. Okay, so H plus ions are secreted in the lumen and sodium moves out. Okay, so how are the H plus ions produced? By the combination of carbon dioxide and water. Okay, so in the lumen, H plus ions react with bicarbonate to form carbon. So what happens now? H plus ions are moving into the lumen, right? H plus ions are moving into, they recycled back. How? So they are recycled, they react with the bicarbonate ions that are present in the filtrate. Okay, I forgot to mention that to you, but they're reacting with the bicarbonate ions in the filtrate again to form carbon dioxide. Okay, so it's a reversible reaction. We know H plus ion has secreted into the lumen, the tubule, Again they react, and there's an opposite reaction that is taking place. Again it forms CO2, which goes into the intracellular space. Again it reacts with water. Again this whole cycle takes place. Okay, so cycle repeats itself, and the bicarbonate that are produced are reabsorbed into the blood as its concentration increases. So as the concentration of bicarbonate ions increases, it gets reabsorbed into the blood. Okay, so this H plus ion, this whole recycle concept is happening in the case of sodium hydrogen pump. Okay, the counter transport mechanism. So when the hydrogen ions are secreted into the tubule, the lumen, it again reacts with bicarbonate ions, and the opposite reaction takes place again to form carbon dioxide, and carbon dioxide moves into the cytosol, again reacts with water again. So as and when this bicarbonate ions that are being formed in the cytosol, the concentration increases, they are being moved out. Okay, now it's time for you to go back into the blood. Okay, you get reabsorbed. All right, okay, so clear? I think there's a diagram here. Yeah. Okay, so you can see glucose and sodium moving in together, this co-transport. And sodium and amino acids also moving into together. So amino acid, glucose move out into the interstitial fluid, and this is sodium potassium ATPase pump, which plays an important role. Similarly, hydrogen ion is being secreted in, sodium moving out, okay, being reabsorbed back into the blood. Now this is in the initial part of PCT. Okay, these two methods, the co-transport and the counter transport, are happening in the initial part of PCT. Okay, that time glucose and amino acids get reabsorbed along with sodium, correct? But what happens in the latter part of PCT? Okay, as you're moving towards the end of PCT, now the filtrate is run out of glucose and amino acids. Okay, the glucose and amino acids have reduced in number, okay, in molecules, so the concentration, sorry. So it has now it is not viable for sodium to depend on glucose and amino acids to be reabsorbed. That time chloride plays a role. So chloride is concentration increases by the time it enters the latter part, the later part of PCT, the end part of PCT. Okay, so along with chloride, sodium tends to move out. Okay, so in the latter part of PCT, chloride ion concentration is high, so leaving sodium ions to be reabsorbed with chloride ions. Okay, so this happens in the later part. Most of the glucose amino acids is being reabsorbed in the initial part of PCT. So by towards the end, what happens, sodium cannot depend on now glucose or amino acids and all to be reabsorbed, so it depends on chloride ions. So chloride ions tend to increase in concentration towards the end of PCT. Okay, and so they tend to leave. Okay, so to answer your question, let's go back to the question, because that's the point. Yeah, the part of nephron involved in active reabsorption of sodium is PCT. Okay, so I think I've explained in detail how sodium absorption is happening. Okay, the active reabsorption of sodium is happening in PCT. So it is very important for you to understand this, and please note this down in your notebooks, so it's easy for you to remember. Okay, question number 6. Removal of proximal convoluted tubule. So proximal convoluted tubule from the nephron will result in. Okay, so this was 2015 cancelled exam, and you have A, B, C, and D. Let's go through our options. So removal of PCT will result in what? No change in quality and quantity of urine. Now that is very unlikely. There will be some change. No urine formation? No. More diluted urine? Yes. More concentrated urine? No. So when PCT is removed, now we already know 65% of sodium and water are being reabsorbed in the PCT, which is a very big, it's more than half, correct? So if PCT was removed, obviously water and sodium wouldn't be able to reabsorb, right? So clearly the urine that will be formed will be dilute. So it is C. Your answer is C. This was a good question. This was a logical question where you needed to apply the information. So now when I explain how sodium is reabsorbed, now you understand, right, what is exactly happening in PCT. And now to answer this question, you will have a very logical explanation. Let's go to the discussion. So about 65% of sodium and water are reabsorbed in the PCT. Remember, water is being passively diffused into the interstitial fluid, okay, in the PCT. And most of it is happening, like more than half of sodium and water are being reabsorbed. So if PCT is absent, the filtrate will remain diluted because of the presence of water. Oh, sorry. I went to the next question. So hence, you will have a more diluted urine. To answer your question, let's go back to the question. Yeah. So removal of PCT will result in a more diluted urine. Okay, so this was a very logical question, although hypothetical situation, but you need to understand what PCT is exactly doing. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Question number 7. The maximum amount of electrolytes in water, okay, that's 70 to 80% they have mentioned here, from the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed in which part of the nephron? And this appeared in 2012. So you have the ascending limb of loop of Henle, you have DCT, you have PCT, descending limb of loop of Henle. So electrolytes and water, 70 to 80%. So most of it is happening in PCT. We have already said. Now the official number is 65% according to medical textbooks. They have said 70 to 80%. Close enough. So your answer should be C. Okay. Let's go to the explanation. So 65% of sodium and water from the filtrate is reabsorbed from the PCT before the filtrate reaches the loop of Henle. Yeah. And a low percentage of chloride is also reabsorbed. The question of water and electrolytes. Okay, so most of the electrolytes are also reabsorbed. Sodium, that is, forms a major part, and some chloride is also reabsorbed. Most of the electrolytes are also reabsorbed in the ascending limb of loop of Henle, but that comes on later on. But water and electrolytes, yes. So sodium and chloride are involved in this PCT. Okay. So clearly PCT is the right answer. The appropriate answer for this would be PCT. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 8. Which one of the following correctly explains the function of a specific part of the human nephron? And this appeared in Main 2011. So you have option A. So we have to find the correctly explain it. Get another pen. Correctly explains. Okay. You have A. Podocytes create minute spaces, slit pores, for the filtration of blood into the Bowman's capsule. Yes. That is the right answer actually. Henle's loop. Most reabsorption of the major substances from the glomerular filtrate. Not most. DCT. C. Option C. DCT. Reabsorption of potassium ions into the surrounding blood capillaries. Now DCT does reabsorb potassium, but there is also secretion of potassium by the principal cells. Okay, by the principal cell there is also reabsorption of potassium in the DCT. Now those principal cells appear in the last part, the late part of DCT. Okay, so there are principal cells in DCT that secrete potassium. So not only reabsorption does happen, but they secrete potassium ions also. So this won't be correct. Afferent arteriole carries the blood away from the glomerulus towards renal vein. No, efferent arteriole carries blood away from the glomerulus towards renal veins. So clearly D is wrong, C is also wrong, and B is also wrong. So your answer is A, podocytes. Okay, your answer should be A. Create minute spaces, slit pores for the filtration of blood into the Bowman's capsule. Okay, let's look at the discussion. So podocytes are layer of epithelial cells. If you study the anatomy, the histology of Bowman's capsule and the glomerulus, you know podocytes are layer of epithelial cells surrounding the basement membrane of the glomerular capillary on the glomerular side. They are foot-like processes separated by gaps, and they have slit pores through which glomerular filtrate flows. Okay, so this is a very good diagram. This is taken from the textbook of human histology by Inder B. Singh. So it's a very good book to study human histology. Singh. Alright, so you have podocyte here. This is what a podocyte actually looks like. Okay, and this is the slit diaphragm. This is the pore. Okay, this is the pore. Clear? So they have these pores over here. So they're separated by gaps that have slit pores. Okay, the pores over here. Okay, through which the glomerular filtrate happens. Okay, this is a good diagram. This clearly shows how the podocyte looks and how the pore, those foot-like processes that they say, they are separated by gaps. So you can see the gaps over here, and they have slit pores through which glomerular filtrate flows. Clearly matches the definition. So this is another diagram. This is an overview. So this you can see largely, you can see these podocytes. There's those foot-like processes over here. Here. I don't know if this is clear to you. See this foot-like process over here. Okay. So this is an enlarged diagram. The slit pores are over here. So he's just taken one section over here and he has shown the diagram of the podocytes. But I think this just shows how it looks. But the previous diagram by Inder B. Singh over here, this clearly shows the anatomy of the podocyte. Okay. Alright, so this was clear. This was clear, very direct. I mean, obviously you needed to know information about the whole excretory system. How the nephrons work, the DCT and the podocytes and the limbo or the loop of Henle. But I guess I should have been able to answer this correctly. This shouldn't have been a problem. Let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 9. Which one of the following statements in regard to the excretion by the human kidneys is correct? Let me just change this pen. So you have to find the correct statement. This appeared in 2010. So you have the descending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to water. Is it a correct statement? No, it is permeable to water. We have just discussed this. So A is incorrect. DCT is incapable of reabsorbing HCO3-. No, it is very much capable of reabsorbing HCO3- through the hydrogen ATPase pump. So incorrect. Nearly 99% of the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed by the renal tubules. Is it? Of course it is. Yes. C is the right answer. D. Ascending limb of loop of Henle is impermeable to electrolytes. Impermeable? No, we've just discussed this in detail. So clearly D is wrong. So the answer is C. Okay, the answer is C. So let's see how. So on an average, the glomerular filtration rate is 180 liters per day. We all know that. And the urine that is excreted is 1 to 2 liters. Now, if the excretion is 1 or 2 liters, let's say 1 liter, and 180 liters per day is filtered. Okay, so 179 liters is being reabsorbed. So 179 by 180 into 100, do a calculation, to be approximately 99%. This is the calculation. So clearly 99% of the glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed by the renal tubules, because 179 is being reabsorbed by 180 into 100. Just do a calculation, you will get approximately 99%. So this is the logic behind why 99% of glomerular filtrate is reabsorbed by the renal tubules. Okay, so this needs a little bit of logic, but just learn it as a fact. Simple. Okay, just learn it as a fact, simple, but this is the reason behind why 99%, why that is the right answer. Okay, simple. Let's move on to the next question. All right, question number 10. Glucose is taken back from glomerular filtrate through A. Active transport, B. Passive transport, C. Osmosis, D. Diffusion. This appeared in 1993. We've already discussed this. When sodium is reabsorbed, it carries glucose along with it. Rather, glucose and sodium move in together. So it is active transport with the help of sodium potassium ATPase pump. Okay, so your answer should be A. This is fact. Just remember this. Okay, active transport is taking place over here. Let's go to the discussion. So glucose is reabsorbed by the process of active transport. In PCT, sodium potassium ATPase pump pulls out sodium from the intracellular space. Again, same concept. Okay, sodium potassium pump pulling out sodium from inside. So sodium from the filtrate moves into the intracellular space. Okay, and along with glucose and amino acids. And so this process is called co-transport mechanism. Okay, so here it is. I think you're already familiar with this diagram. So you have glucose, sodium moving in, sodium moving out over here, and then glucose then moves out through those channels over here, and amino acids move out into the interstitial fluid. Obviously, you don't want to lose out on glucose and amino acids. So the PCT is designed in such a way that it is not allowing glucose and amino acids to be excreted out. We don't want that. So we want it to be pulled in. Along with that, sodium also is getting pulled in. Okay. So it is clearly an active transport. Okay, it's a secondary active transport, because with the help of glucose it is being pulled in. Okay, this pump over here. Okay, so yeah, actually secondary active transport, let me clarify, it is with the help of an ion. Okay, so glucose is being pulled in with the help of an ion. That is why it's called secondary active transport. This is called a primary active transport. Primary active transport, and this is a type of secondary active transport. Okay, clear? I've already explained this to you, so I won't go into details again. Okay, we'll move on to the next question. If you like, you can note this down in your notebooks so that you can study it. All right, question number 11. Under normal conditions, which one is completely reabsorbed in the renal tubule? This appeared in 1991. A. Urea. No. That is the incorrect answer. B. Uric acid. No. C. Salts. No. Completely reabsorbed. Glucose. We've already explained. I've already explained this to you, how glucose is being reabsorbed back along with sodium, right, in the proximal convoluted tubule. So your answer should be D. Really? If you want, you can rewind, go back and listen to the discussion again, how glucose is being reabsorbed. You will understand that. But this is the correct answer for question number 11. Okay, so let's go to the discussion. So under normal conditions, glucose is completely reabsorbed in the PCT. So hence, presence of glucose in urine is an indicator of diabetes mellitus. Okay, so when glucose is not being able to reabsorb into the cells like it should with the help of when the insulin is there, but the receptors are not functioning like they should. Okay, so this is diabetes mellitus. So what happens is, in diabetes mellitus, glucose is just floating around. There's a large amount of glucose that is being collected, and that is excreted out into the urine. Usually in a normal condition, glucose will not be present in the urine, very minimal. Okay, very minimal. But in the case of diabetes mellitus, a large amount of glucose will be present in the urine because they are not being absorbed in the cells like they should. Okay, so the receptors of the cells are not receptive to the glucose. Okay, so this is diabetes mellitus type 2 diabetes. And yes, presence of glucose in urine is an indicator of that. Okay, so we know the fact that glucose is not supposed to be present, but when glucose is present, that means yes, there's it is an indicator of a disease. So if the amount of glucose in the tubule, that is the tubular load, exceeds the amount of glucose that can be reabsorbed from the filtrate, then glucose begins to appear in urine, obviously. Okay, so if the tubular load over here is more than the transport maximum. Now, transport maximum is just a this is extra piece of information. So I just want to explain to you how this happens. Transport maximum, is just a word to indicate amount of glucose that can be reabsorbed. So the receptors that are the channels that are there that allow the reabsorption of glucose from the filtrate. Okay, so the transport maximum for glucose, if you have to go by numbers, in a normal condition, transport maximum for glucose is 375 mg per minute, and the tubular load is 125 mg per minute. Okay, this is a normal condition, so don't worry about this because this is just extra piece of information that I wanted to give to you. So this actually explains that there is a certain amount, a limit to how much glucose can be reabsorbed back into the blood. If there's too much glucose, not all that glucose can be reabsorbed back into the blood. That glucose will then eventually get excreted out. So the maximum, if the maximum transport maximum for glucose is 375, and it goes up beyond that, then it will not be able to reabsorb glucose back into the blood and will get excreted out. Okay, so if to go by numbers, yes, the transport maximum for glucose is 375 and the tubular load in normal condition is 125. So obviously it is less. Okay, it is less, the tubular load is less, so there's no problem in glucose being reabsorbed back into the blood. Okay, so this is an extra piece of information. So yes, glucose is completely reabsorbed in the PCT. Okay, so let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 12. Brush border is characteristic of, you have your options, and this appeared in 1990. I've already explained this to you when I explained what? When I explained PCT. Okay, so neck of nephron, collecting tube, all of these, no, they don't fit into the criteria, the question. So it is answer C, PCT. The PCT is lined by brush border, cuboidal or columnar epithelium. The collecting tubules are lined by simple cuboidal or columnar epithelium. The neck of the nephron. Now, what is the neck of the nephron? I'm sure many of you don't know what neck of the nephron is, right? It's lined by simple squamous epithelium. Okay, you can note this down. These are facts. You need to understand the histology, what cell is present where. So this is a diagram where I want to show you neck. This is the neck, the junction between glomerulus and the PCT. Okay, this is the neck region of the nephron. Clearly it is the neck. You can see that, right? So it is lined by simple squamous epithelium. Okay, clear? This was very clear. This was very obvious. And I've already explained this brush border epithelium. It provides a very extended surface area for the PCT and reabsorption to take place. Okay, so brush border is a characteristic of PCT. Move on to the next question. All right, question number 13. Reabsorption of useful substances from glomerular filtrate occurs in, appeared in 1989. Again, this is a similar question, right? Collecting tube, no. Loop of Henle, no. PCT, yeah. Distal convoluted tubule, not really. Reabsorption of useful substances. The answer should be C. Again, let's go to the explanation. So, 65% of solvent water are reabsorbed in PCT. So, along with that, what glucose and amino acids are being reabsorbed, chloride ions also get reabsorbed, right? Bicarbonate ions also, yes, and some potassium ions also are getting reabsorbed. So, they reabsorb the important constituents. Okay, the PCT reabsorbs important constituents. So this was a very similar question to the previous one of the previous questions also. This is a very important piece of information. Now you know how PCT works, right? So please note that down, the working of PCT, and yeah, let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 14. Which of the following factors is responsible for the formation of concentrated urine? You have your options A, B, C and D. This appeared in 2019 NEET. Pretty recent. So we have to find out the factors responsible for the formation of concentrated urine. Okay. A. Hydrostatic pressure during glomerular filtration. Nah, not really. B. Low levels of antidiuretic hormone. No. It's when ADH, antidiuretic hormones, are high is when concentrated urine is formed. So clearly B is incorrect. C. Maintaining hyperosmolarity towards the medullary interstitium in the kidneys. Yes, this is the right answer. Secretion of erythropoietin by juxtaglomerular complex, no. Okay, clearly C is the right answer. If you've not got C as the right answer, please go back and read the chapter, read NCERT, because this is a very, very, very important concept, okay, of how concentrated urine is formed. Okay, now there are 3 ways by which concentrated urine is formed in our body. Concentrated urine. First way, hyperosmolarity. Now, how does this hyperosmolarity happen? It happens with the concept of countercurrent mechanism. Okay, this concept is very important to understand how urine is formed. Okay, countercurrent mechanism happens in the loop of Henle. Okay, in the loop of Henle. Now, we have clearly seen in the previous part, in the first few questions, I've explained how loop of Henle electrolytes are being reabsorbed, right? Electrolytes are being reabsorbed in the thick ascending limb of loop of Henle, which plays a very important role in reabsorbing water from the descending limb of loop of Henle. Okay, this creates a very hyperosmotic environment. This electrolytes movement of the ascending limb of loop of Henle creates a very hyperosmotic environment for reabsorption of water. Okay, creates a very hyperosmotic environment in the reabsorption of water. Okay, so that is how concentrated urine is formed. This is one of the ways. Second way is high levels of ADH. Now, ADH is a hormone that is secreted by the posterior pituitary gland. Okay, so ADH are there are receptors present in the collecting tubule, okay, in the DCT collecting tubule. So they reabsorb water back into the blood. Okay, they reabsorb water back into the blood. This is another way how concentrated urine is formed. Correct? Third way is urea recycling. Now we know that reabsorption of electrolytes by the ascending limb of loop of Henle creates a hyperosmotic environment. But urea also helps in maintaining that hyperosmotic environment. So urea, when it reaches the collecting duct, not all of it is excreted out. Some of it is being reabsorbed into the blood and back into the loop of Henle, and then it gets recycled and recycled and recycled. Okay, and this is a very important concept or method of conserving water. Okay, it just concentrates the urine. Okay, it concentrates the urine. Okay, so basically there's one thing that you need to understand when urine is formed. Okay, now the main point of forming a concentrated urine is our body needs to conserve water. Okay, we don't want to remove water usually. Okay, it is a very this whole why does counter current mechanism need to happen? Why does urea need to recycle? Why the hell do ADH need to come in and start reabsorbing water? Okay, so this creates an environment to reabsorb as much water that the body can. Okay, and that is how the urine that is formed is concentrated. Okay, the urine that is formed is concentrated at the end. So these three methods create that environment. Okay, the hyperosmolarity of the interstitial, the medulla interstitial region, the ADH levels, and urea recycling, they create that environment for as much water to be reabsorbed. Okay, so that body does not lose water, especially in the cases where there is a deficiency of water. Okay, you don't have access to water, you've not been drinking water, so the body comes into a position where it has to maintain homeostasis. Okay, you need water in your body for the cellular mechanisms to take place. So what happens is the kidneys then begin to reabsorb a lot of water, and at the end it forms a very concentrated urine. Okay, so this is a very 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 important concept. Please go back and read NCERT and understand countercurrent mechanism, countercurrent exchange, which happens with vasa recta. Okay, the vasa recta is the blood capillaries that are in close connection with loop of Henle. Okay, they are anatomically placed in such a way with the loop of Henle where exchange happens. Okay, when exchange happens, then water gets reabsorbed back into the blood and electrolytes get reabsorbed back into the interstitial fluid. Okay, so yes, this is it. Okay, yeah, to answer your question, yes, maintaining hyperosmolarity towards the medullary interstitium in the kidneys is the correct answer. Okay, to form concentrated urine. You know what, I'll make another video where I will explain urine formation in detail, because this is a very long topic, and if I go into details it will just go on and on, it will become too much information. So to answer your question, our objective here is to answer the question. I've given you extra information here, but to answer your question, yeah, see, yes, see. Okay. Also, factors responsible for forming concentrated urine are: level of ADH is responsible for reabsorption of water in the medullary collecting tubules. So high levels of ADH support high reabsorption of water, resulting in the formation of concentrated urine. Hyperosmolarity of the medullary interstitium via the process of counter current mechanism. This is a result of electrolytes moving out of the thick ascending limb or loop of Henle continuously, as a result of which water moves out from the descending limb or loop of Henle, thus trapping these solutes and hence concentrating the urine. Okay, so electrolytes move out from the ascending limb, so it pulls out the water by osmosis through the descending limb of loop of Henle, and so it creates a very concentrated urine at the end. Okay, so that hyperosmolarity is a kind of environment that is created in the renal medulla region for that process to occur. Lastly, urea recycling also is another important region. So urea recycling helps in maintaining that hyperosmolarity in the renal medulla region. Okay, so it increases the osmolarity and thereby increasing the concentration of urine. So these three mechanisms or factors are very important in understanding, because you need to see, now you got this question in NEET 2019, I guess. Yes, 2019. So see how important this concept was. Okay, if you didn't know, then you wouldn't have been able to answer this question. Okay, so it is important to understand that loop of Henle that I explained, PCT I explained. Please note this down. You will not be doubtful about this ever again. Okay, you'll be able to answer these questions easily, because this was a very good question. Okay, and this tested your concept. Okay, so this deserves a smiley face. All right, let's move on to the next question. Okay, question number 15. If Henle's loop were absent from the mammalian nephron, which one of the following is to be expected? This appeared in 2003. Again, this is a conceptual based question, smiley face. I like conceptual based questions, they're not really directed, you have to think. So if Henle's loop were absent, there'll be no urine formation? No, not really. There will be hardly any change in the quality and quantity of urine formed? No. The urine will be more concentrated? In fact, no. Because loop of Henle plays an important role in concentrating the urine. So if it was absent, then it would not form a concentrated urine. So the urine will be more dilute. This is the appropriate answer. Answer D. So the descending limb of loop of Henle is highly permeable to water. Hence, reabsorption of water takes place. If loop of Henle is absent, then urine will be diluted. Okay, urine will be diluted also. Yeah, that's what it is. So either then, if the loop of Henle is absent, again the hyperosmotic region wouldn't be created. Okay, then again obviously electrolytes wouldn't be able to reabsorb back, and then you can't pull out water also along with that, reabsorb water also along with that. So it would not form a concentrated urine, it would be a dilute urine. This is a hypothetical situation, but then this helps you understand how the loop of Henle actually works. Okay, so next question. Concentration of urine depends upon which organ? And this appeared in 2000. Bowman's capsule, length of Henle's loop, PCT, network of capillaries arising from glomerulus. So concentration of urine depends upon which organ? Clearly it is the length of Henle's loop. We have just discussed that, how Henle's loop plays a very important role in forming a concentrated urine. Of course, now when you're talking about network of capillaries arising from glomerulus, actually it is the vasa recta which helps in the countercurrent exchange. Okay, it is a vasa recta which helps in the countercurrent exchange, and they are the ones that are present in the medulla region along with the loop of Henle. Okay, so they are in close proximity with the loop of Henle, and where countercurrent exchange happens. Countercurrent multiplication is what? Countercurrent multiplication, when you read that term, means the osmolarity is increasing in the medulla. Osmolarity is increasing in the medulla. Hyperosmotic region environment is formed in the medulla region. Okay, the vasa recta comes in just to absorb the water back into the blood. Okay, so there's an exchange that is happening, and they are present in the flow of blood, and the filtrate is in opposite directions. Okay, that's why it's called countercurrent. Okay, countercurrent exchange. Also the loop of Henle is also moving in countercurrent form. So length of Henle's loop. Now juxtamedullary nephrons are present, right, in our body. I think about 25% of juxtamedullary nephrons are present, and this juxtamedullary nephrons have a very long loop of Henle. Okay, they're very long loop of Henle. They're so long they go on to the tip of the papilla. Okay, they're so long. Then move deep down the papilla region till the papilla region. Okay, this is the medulla region. Okay, so this was the loop of Henle. This is the papilla region over here, and then going to the calyx region, right? So this is the loop of Henle will go. So the longer the loop of Henle, the wider the surface area for concentrated urine to be formed, right? Clearly, obviously, this is logic, right? So you have a longer loop of Henle, a wider region area is present for the urine to be more concentrated. That means more electrolytes will be reabsorbed, then along with that more water is also being reabsorbed, right? And the cycle keeps repeating itself over and over again. Okay, so more electrolytes are reabsorbed, more water is reabsorbed, again PCT is adding in the filtrate, again the same process, electrolytes are reabsorbed, water is reabsorbed, again PCT drops into the filtrate. Okay, this changes the osmolarity in that loop of Henle, and the longer the loop of Henle will be there, the more the concentration will be there. Okay, hyperosmolarity will be there in the medulla region, the more water will be reabsorbed and more concentrated the urine will be present. Okay, so clearly length of Henle's loop along according to this question helps in forming a concentrated urine. Okay, it helps in the concentration of urine rather. Okay, so your answer should be B. Now you see, if you notice, the last three questions, that's 14, 15 and 16, are around the same topic. So now you realize how important this concept is. Okay, how important the concept of forming a concentrated urine is. Like I already told you, our body is designed in such a way that it does not want to lose water. It tries to conserve as much water as possible. So it forms a very concentrated urine at the end. Okay, that is excreted out. And obviously there are three ways by which it does: the urea recycling, the hyperosmotic region that is formed in interstitial medulla region, and then high levels of ADH. Okay, so these three methods are the factors by which a concentrated urine is formed. Okay, so this is the function of the nephrons actually, to be able to form a urine that does not lose much water also. Okay, and it forms a very concentrated liquid at the end that is excreted out. So this concept is very important to understand. Please go back and read NCERT. Please be familiar or be very thorough with these concepts. Clearly you have seen this is another smiley face worthy question, because this has clearly showed you whether you are familiar or whether you actually understand how urine formation is happening. Okay, and whether you understand how the parts of the nephron are functioning. Okay, so yeah, let's go to the discussion. So countercurrent mechanism depends on loop of Henle and vasa recta, like I've already explained. So the juxtamedullary nephrons contain long loops of Henle and vasa recta moving deeply into the medulla till the tip of renal papilla. So the countercurrent exchange between them allow the formation of a hyperosmotic renal medulla, and this contributes to the formation of concentrated urine. I've already explained this to you. So yeah, I will not go further anymore on this topic. Let's move on. Okay, so we've come to the end of this video lecture, and I hope you've enjoyed this video's lecture, and I hope you've learned something new today, because I've explained a lot of topics. I've explained how PCT works, how loop of Henle works, and how the concentrated urine works. I will again, like I said, make another video where I'll explain this separately, so that you can get help from that and be clear and thorough with your concepts for the exam. And please like, share and subscribe to MJ Need Biology. And I am also there on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, where you can follow me there for more updates. I'll put the link in the description box below, and I'll also put the links to the previous part 1 of this series, excretory products and their elimination. Okay, and I will see you in the next video lecture. All right, bye.